Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is Thursday, and my name is Mark Smith, and I'm the Group Managing Director of People to People in Australia and Frog Recruitment in New Zealand. It's a fabulous afternoon here in Sydney, bright and sunny and really crisp. It's my favourite time of the year. And we are here this afternoon for the fourth in our Leadership Webinar series. Today, the session is Bold and Brave Questions to Co-Create a Resilient Digital Business. And we're here with Sam Williams, who is based in Auckland. Welcome, Sam. So Sam is a serial entrepreneur and digital change agent with a career spanning North America, Europe, Asia Pacific in technology sales, business development and marketing. Sam is the creator of the Accelerate World Ecosystem Program, the Australasian digital marketing firm Amplify Marketing, and acts as CMO for Certus Solutions. Sam is fascinated by how human interaction and engagement are evolving into the digital realm and transforming how relationships are formed, value is created, and revenue is generated. He works at the forefront of digital strategy with leading IBM and Microsoft partners in the region, as well as the Australian Graduate School of Management here in New South Wales, delivering the Accelerate DX program. Sam has worked extensively with Frog Recruitment in New Zealand and specifically with Jane Kennelly, and hopefully Jane will be able to join us on the webinar this afternoon. But the one thing that should not be missed for this particular audience is that Sam is actually a citizen of both Australia and New Zealand. So he's a bit of a, I think we were chatting before, something of a bicultural, bipolar ambassador for both countries. But I'm still really concerned about who he actually supports in the rugby, but he assures me he supports no one. So let me pass over to Sam. Welcome to this afternoon.
Probably the single worst way to introduce myself is to say that I don't support either side, but I guess I want to remain neutral in all these matters. So thanks, Mark. Great to be with you all today. So we've got a pretty action-packed schedule. So we'll just dive right into it. So I think I need to do that. There we go. Remy's helped me out there. So today I want to talk a little bit about bold and brave questions leaders should be asking themselves and their teams to co-create more resilient digital businesses. And part of that is I want to just start by introducing myself a little bit. And most of us are coming back from some form of lockdown experience, and I just wanted to take a moment to express some of the things that I did during lockdown. And if you're curious to see that, you can follow me on Instagram. It mostly involved cooking. There was a little bit of foraging there. There was a great deal of walking and a lot of photography. But when I'm not walking and foraging and cooking for my Instagram channel, I'm creating content with different people and helping enterprises market at a social distance. So an interesting concept to start considering. Co-creating intelligent digital experiences, in terms of online experiences for enterprise customers, and helping them also transform how business generates revenue online. So that's a little bit about myself. I also wanted to start with something that was a little interactive. If you're interested and don't know this, there is a really simple way in which you can connect using LinkedIn, using QR codes. So if you happen to have your phone handy, as Mark does here, there's a little exercise that if you go into LinkedIn, you'll see in your feed this little spot at the top that's marked by a red circle on here. If you click on that or touch on that, it will bring up a screen similar to this if you've got an iPhone, which if you hold it up to the screen now, it will scan this QR code and you will connect with me on LinkedIn. So since Mark is, we're not connected so far, we'll just test the technology. And I guess if nothing else, here's a new feature or a new aspect of LinkedIn that you can engage with.
So apparently it's pending here, Sam, now. So you need to approve me to become, become a contact with you. But I've done that. It's worked. It's seamless. Thank you.
Right. Marvelous. So one little takeaway for you all, if you're thinking about how you form a social distance, my watch has just started buzzing with requests to connect. So that's great. It works. So this is one of the challenges that we have with relationships. And here's a little technique that you can include in your email signatures or in different presentations so that people can connect with you digitally. One of the things that I thought was quite important in terms of having a conversation in times of a pandemic is this little diagram that I came across from a chap called Peter Cook. He's from Thought Leaders Australia. And it's about making sure that we're tonally sensitive to who it is that we're having a conversation with from a business standpoint. Nothing worse than experiencing tone-deaf leadership, as we've experienced recently in the States. So he breaks down a little bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that there's a group of people that are thriving, the smallest segment of businesses. There are some that are in a steady state, and then there's a group that are just surviving. And there's also a group that are sort of going from steady to surviving, back to steady, down to surviving. And then there's a group that are drowning. And so it's particularly important to be sensitive to where people are at in this kind of model in terms of how you have conversations with people. So I just wanted to frame that is really about talking about those that are in the surviving, steady, and thriving state. The challenges that you face if you're in a drowning state are a little bit different. We do have some thoughts on that, but primarily this presentation is focused on those that are in the top three layers of this diagram. So I've got three sections to what I want to talk about today. The first is about getting perspective on the challenge that we're in the midst of, and how we can put this into context a little bit. Sometimes history can teach us something about the situation that we find ourselves in. Equally, I want to share with you some examples of different pathways out and examples of what people have been doing in response to living during some form of lockdown or social distance. And then, teaser or spoiler alert, at the end, I actually want to share with you three bold and what I would describe as big, bold, and brave questions to ask yourself and your organization. So with no further ado, I'll get into the first section. So perspective is an incredibly important thing when we're in difficult times. So Remy has a poll that he's about to share with everybody. Please feel free to engage with the poll. It'd be great to get some feedback and understanding of where you guys are at and what your perceptions are of the situation that we find ourselves in. And so this poll is a little bit about how much time we see as the pandemic playing out over. So first section is on perspective. I was interested to see an article in The Economist back on the 8th of April. And you know, the comment here was that the coronavirus crisis will change the world of commerce. Gosh, there's a bit of alliteration there. Firms that make it through will face a new business climate. And I think for many of us, we have been through some form of crisis before, whether it be a recession, 9/11, or some sort of major event like an earthquake, for instance. And how you recover from that is there will be lessons in that, but it's true to say that in our living memory, none of us have actually experienced anything like what we're experiencing at the moment. I just thought it would be worthwhile to kind of put that in perspective and quote from this article from The Economist. So with countries accounting for over 50% of world GDP in lockdown, the collapse in commercial activity is far more severe than in previous recessions. And the exit path from lockdowns will be precarious, with uneasy consumers, a stop-start rhythm that inhibits efficiency, and tricky new health protocols to deal with. And so for some of us, that involves closed borders, quarantines, an inability to move between states, and varying levels of lockdown. I just wanted to use the example of 9/11 as something that's in living memory. You might see a little dog pop up here. It's about time for her walk. That's one of the joys of presenting from home. She is actually one of the Frog top dogs,
Top dog,
by the way.
Right.
Yeah, well, she wasn't top dog, but she was a model for Frog's top dog. Yeah, so most of us probably can remember 9/11 and the fact that it took a while for things to get back to normal. And it didn't get back to the same normal as before. It was a new normal. So where security screening became just a fact of life, and it was just totally, well, it was somewhat different to before. So I guess the point here is for us to think that this is not about getting back to normal. It's about getting back to some new normal and envisaging what that new normal will be. And another pandemic to kind of put this in context is the HIV/AIDS pandemic. Believe it or not, that for nearly 40 years, since 1981, this has been raging, and it has actually killed somewhere between 25 and 35 million people. Now, there are lessons to be drawn from that. One in particular, just to put things in perspective, is the fact that today there still is no vaccine for HIV/AIDS. Nearly 40 years on, all we have is prevention and prophylactics as our way of preventing the transmission of this particular disease. But one of the lessons that we can draw from this is that there was a considerable amount of fear, rumor, and bigotry that occurred. And we're seeing similar sorts of things play out during the COVID-19 pandemic. There's a lot of fear about what it means. There is racism more than there is bigotry. So labeling it the Chinese flu or the Wuhan flu, I'm not sure helps people come to terms with what it means. And I guess the other part to it is the expectation that we're going to find a vaccine and be able to inoculate 8 billion people in the world in a short period of time is another thing to consider from a perspective standpoint. So I've got this graphic here, which hopefully you can see okay, and it is actually a data visualization of the various pandemics over the years. So believe it or not, the Black Death or the bubonic plague from 1300s killed nearly 200 million people. The Spanish flu, as we're probably aware, killed somewhere between 40 and 50 million. And as I mentioned earlier, HIV/AIDS has killed between 25 and 35 million. Now, this is a slightly old statistic in relation to COVID-19 that you see down the bottom, where it's talking about 4.7 thousand, 4,700 people killed. We're way past that point now. The reason why I wanted to share this is not so much for the number of people that were killed, but what is the average life of a pandemic? Many of us have had to consider, what does this mean to our business? How long is this going to play out over? And it'll be really interesting to see what the poll answers are in terms of our perception of how long we're going to have to deal with either some form of social distancing, some form of economic disruption. But if very roughly looking at these various pandemics over the years, the average life of a pandemic is at least 2 years. So that may be a somewhat sobering point of view or piece of context to contemplate. Mark, how did we go with the polls?
I'll just to give everybody just a couple more seconds to vote. So we've got quite a few votes in already. For those who don't know, it's up on the left-hand side that you'll see the polls there that you should be able to vote there. I was wondering, I was a bit torn myself, Sam, as to which way I would vote, as to whether I would, whether it would last. There was the optimist in me that wanted it to be finished by Christmas. And I've been using that number 2 because I was looking at some of the economics around the GFC, thinking, well, how long did that last for us before we sort of return in the recruitment market or the jobs market? And that was about 9 months for us, from the Lehman Brothers fallover till the middle of the following year. And so for 9 months would put us at the end of the Christmas. But then I had a conversation yesterday with an old business partner of mine who experienced the 91 recession. And he said to me flat out, Mark, this is 2 years at least. So I'm a bit torn. I'm not too sure. The results are, though, 4% of those on the call today have already said that, no, we're on the other side of it. We just need to get back to work. Then 3 to 6 months, or by Christmas, that's about 20%. 32% about 12 months, and it'll be back to normal. 17% up to 24 months, and then beyond 24 months, 27%. So you would probably say a third would say up to about a year, a third more than 2 years, and then everybody else thinks within the year.
Well, yeah, that's interesting to know. I guess kind of moving on in terms of thinking about this from the point of view of reference points and some of the stories that we hear around pandemics. So Contagion is a movie that I'm sure most of us have watched or rewatched as a consequence of what we've been through. One of the things that I've noticed about these pandemic type movies, or World War Z, which is kind of a pandemic / zombie movie, is that these things all take place over a very compacted period of time. So in Contagion, the time from first infection to the discovery of a vaccine was 90 days. So I guess that's one thing that I noticed recently, is that what we see in fictional accounts, while there are many parallels in terms of what we've experienced with COVID-19 in relation to Contagion, one of the things that is definitely not on the mark is over what time period it would take place. So just an interesting thing to note. Another thing that a lot of people have been talking about is the second wave. And I think for most of us, we think of the second wave as being the next wave of deaths or hospitalizations and the stress that it puts on our hospital system. But this is rather an interesting graphic from a chap called Victor Zeng. He's from the Pulmonary and Critical Care Department of the University of Colorado. And he's talking about the different types of waves that we'll experience. And you know, those of you who are surfers, you'll know that there are different types of waves that you experience in the ocean. So the first wave is immediate mortality and morbidity of COVID-19. But he's talking about the second wave being the impact on resource restriction on urgent and non-COVID conditions. The third wave being the impact of interrupted care on vulnerable community members and around chronic conditions. So you're no doubt hearing stories of people that are undergoing cancer treatment of some sort that are experiencing difficulty in terms of getting care. There are non-urgent operations have all been put off, and they're stacking up now. So some of the effects of a pandemic don't necessarily lie in the disease itself, but the contributing factors to the disease. And the other interesting aspect of this graphic that I found interesting is the idea of the fourth wave, and that's around the psychic trauma. So I've heard mention in the media of, mental illness being a challenge, and I've definitely heard stories of how domestic abuse is now a bigger challenge as a result of people being in some form of restricted environment. But there is the economic injury and the psychic trauma of losing your job, or something as simple as, it's not really simple, but something as significant, I should say, as attending a funeral and not being able to say goodbye to loved ones. Flip side also is not being able to hold a wedding and have those people that you love celebrate with you, some sort of marriage. These are all events and life-affirming activities that, as part of a global village, is not necessarily on offer to us. We thought nothing of holding a wedding in Queenstown for people from Australia before. It's just not on offer now. So another thing about these waves and looking to history, if we look at the Spanish flu, or what is actually the H1N1 influenza of 1918, these are some charts from the National Geographic, where they looked at different responses in terms of social distancing and lockdown between various states and cities across the states in 1918. And what's the top line takeaway from this is that history tells us every country, every state, and every region will be different in both their response and their recovery. And you can see two contrasting examples between Philadelphia and New York here. Philadelphia waited 8 days after their death rate began to take off before banning gatherings, closing schools, but they endured the highest death rate of all the cities studied. San Francisco, on the other hand, relaxed social distancing measures, and they faced a long second wave of deaths. New York, on the other hand, had an early intervention. They began quarantine measures 11 days before the death rate spiked, and the city had the lowest overall death rate on the Eastern Seaboard. And I guess in terms of what we're experiencing today, there are radically different approaches that have been taken in Sweden versus New Zealand. Sweden has had a much more relaxed approach to social distancing and lockdowns, whereas New Zealand went early and hard. Each is paying a different price. Certainly Sweden in terms of their mortality rate, and I suspect that while New Zealand has only 22 deaths, we will be paying a higher price economically for this. It's too soon to say, but it is interesting to contrast that it will be different for each of these two countries. Likewise, between Queensland and Victoria, you're seeing two quite different approaches and quite a considerable amount of controversy about what is the right thing to do in terms of opening borders and creating trans-Tasman travel bubbles. And every state and each region and each country is going to have quite a different response set and therefore quite a different recovery. So the third thing that I'd like to talk about contextually is around complacency. So a chap called Albert Camus wrote a book back in 1947 called The Plague, where he actually examined what happened during the plagues of the 1300s. And what he suggested back in 1947 is that complacency is the real pandemic. That people can survive initially by going into some form of lockdown, but if they don't continue to manage their social distancing, they run the risk of actually getting infected, or there are other types of waves that will affect the mortality rates and our quality of life rates. And one of the quotes from Albert Camus is a really simple one. Stupidity has a knack of getting its way. And unfortunately, for better or for worse, we're seeing this come out primarily from what I can see in the States, but you're also seeing pockets of online Twitter sphere types of commentary that are perhaps not what I would describe as being considered intelligent, thoughtful ways of approaching this. Many of them kind of fit in that category of stupid. And so this idea of complacency, and in New Zealand especially, now that all of the social distancing measures have been lifted, I would say that collectively in New Zealand, there's a breathing of a sigh of relief. You know, things feel like they're more or less back to normal. Sure, we can't travel to overseas, but you know, it's back to normal. Yet on the day that New Zealand decided to relax all social distancing and lockdown regimes was the day after the greatest number of cases was reported in the world. So there was a new peak in case reporting, so that the pandemic is actually long from over. And so from that perspective, in both countries, Australia and New Zealand, we cannot afford to be complacent about what this means. And there are also different prices that both countries are going to have to pay, and the region will have to pay in relation to what's happened. One of the things that I just want to caution everybody about is disinformation. And how, coming back to that slide around AIDS and ignorance being the biggest challenge. So whilst complacency is a challenge for us, disinformation, and isn't it interesting that in Contagion, and so this is Jude Law in Contagion, is, you know, handing out in the days before Twitter, flyers on cars saying the CDC lies. There is a cure, you know, it's a fake cure as it happens in this particular case. And to quote a world leader, who would have thought that the types of disinformation we would be experiencing would actually be coming from that same leader around how potentially shining light into people and injecting bleach or disinfectant is going to have some sort of impact on things. So it's terribly confusing, and I would argue discombobulating the experiences that we're having in terms of the information that we are getting. So it is very important for us to educate ourselves on the facts and understand better some of the challenges and consequences of this. So just to talk about this from the point of view of different countries and different locations, you know, there's a new normal that's emerging for some, but not for others. As I mentioned, New Zealand is pretty much back to normal. Masks now being mandated on the use of public transport there. And in other countries, what you're going to see is the application of technology for surveillance in quite different ways than we're used to. So this is an example of what a product from IBM is able to do called Worker Insights. And it uses a combination of optical and thermal imaging cameras and beacons or IoT devices to enable you to perform social distancing scoring, you know, health monitoring, occupancy monitoring, no-go zone alerting and monitoring, crowd density management, body temperature monitoring, and surprise, surprise, face mask detection. Who would have thought that artificial intelligence and visual recognition software that's used for picking out people in crowds is now going to start to be used for face mask detection? So whilst places like New Zealand and potentially Australia won't be experiencing this, you know, when we travel overseas or we're dealing with people who are working overseas, they are going to be experiencing these sorts of types of surveillance and the use of the digital technology in these ways. Equally, something that's a little bit closer to home, so you're seeing responses by different tech companies in the States in particular around how they're going to approach going back to work. So Twitter, as an example, not asking their employees to go back to the workplace until after the 1st of October in the States. With Facebook, they want to move to a regime where at least 50% of Facebook employees could work remotely for the next 5 to 10 years. I guess one of the consequences will be that we won't be packed into spaces in the same way as we were, and we won't get to experience open planned offices in quite the same way as before. And there will be issues in terms of getting vulnerable populations back to work as well. Many people want to stay at home because they perceive the risks of using public transport or being in the office as being detrimental to their long-term health. And one of the things that it was interesting to hear around this was that, the threat of losing your job is not an incentive for people to come back to the office. You have to make them comfortable that the business has taken every precaution to support them in terms of their workplace experience. So you're seeing the emergence of various types of wearables potentially to help with that process. So number two thing that I want to talk about, so that was number one was perspective. This is about context. We've got a second poll, which Remy will be putting up now. I want to dive into what's your situation? What are you finding? What's been your experience to date? And what are your perceptions around where we're at? I guess this is an interesting thing to pop up. Remember this. This is something that from a business standpoint is likely to be off the cards for a wee while to come. So yeah, it's funny. The idea of shaking hands somehow seems like a lifetime ago to me in terms of how time has transpired around being in lockdowns. So in the poll, we're asking you to let us know the various ways in which you see your business today. So category one is, you're okay, things are steady, you're moderately affected, but it's manageable. It's somewhere between a 0 to 20% drop. Chances are you're selling products or you're manufacturing, but you have some form of online commerce. And that gives you a degree of resilience from a revenue standpoint around the sale of your products. So, thinking about it from a trading standpoint, you could probably cope with, a month being taken out of your trading cycle. So that's category one. There's a second category here, which is just surviving. You're struggling to stay afloat. And that probably means that there's been more than a 30% drop in revenues. It's north of 20%, but somewhere around that 30% drop. Now, that might be because you've had export supply interrupted, or you can't get parts for particular products. But the chances are that you're in some sort of business where you sell products and services, and you don't have any means to sell online. The third category is that there are businesses out there that are thriving, and you can't keep up with demand. It's up on last year. Chances are that you're some sort of digital business, you're online or online content-based business. And the fourth category, as we talked about at the beginning, is business has disappeared for the foreseeable future. So your choices are to go into hibernation or simply stop what it is that you're doing. And those will typically be in tourism or travel or retail, and airlines are a particularly good example of that. And I really feel for flight attendants that have literally had their livelihoods pulled out from underneath them, with very little prospect of returning to that old way of working and living for a very extended period of time. So they're one of the groups that have been significantly affected here, and how do they reinvent themselves? Likewise, there are various forms of retail stores and tourist operations that it's just not viable for them to continue doing business. So I'm really interested to know which category you fit into. So do we have any poll results, Mark?
Yeah. Okay. So let's take a look at these. I mean, I'll give people again a chance just to vote now. In the next second, I'll describe our situation at P2P. We're probably we're in the surviving box. Some markets are steady. Depends on where you are geographically and which discipline that you're actually recruiting in. So, for example, some of our legal support businesses, I think I was chatting to you earlier today, people are still getting divorced, etc. During a COVID, that hasn't changed at all. So there's some steady parts to our market, but generally, I mean, with the jobs market, we're in that surviving phase. But I'm delighted to say the results are that 9% of those on the webinar are thriving, 32% are steady, 55% surviving, and unfortunately 5% are not doing so well in that drowning category.
Okay. Well, I guess in some ways that's good news, and in others, it's I guess what it says to me is that we're all challenged by the pandemic in some way, shape, or form. Perhaps for some of us in different ways. So I just wanted to share some ideas and metaphors around pathways for various categories of businesses here. So if you're in that okay, steady state, there are some, and the metaphor here is about, okay, we're not out of the woods yet, but we're finding our way around things. So if things are steady, I would suggest that you want to be sure that you're getting prepared for the next waves. Consider, the gradual restarts and the potential for sudden stops, and understand that there are likely to be significant restrictions on budgets, headcount, and travel going forward. Think about some of the things that you have to do in terms of adopting a new mode of working. So, at one level, yes, it's about remote working, but also you're going to have to think about space utilization and social distancing in office environments, managing expectations of employees, in those vulnerable groups, and those that actually enjoy the experience of working from home, and those that actually want to come back to work as soon as possible. They can't wait to get back to the office. I would suggest that it's an opportunity to invest, divest, and reorganize. What I'm hearing from various companies is that that COVID has been a reason to bring forward various investments. So Auckland Airport is an example. While they've got next to no traffic at the moment, this is one of the best times in their entire history to actually invest in rebuilding the facilities and improving the facilities there, because there's such minimal disruption that's going to occur because they don't have the same passenger throughput. One of the opportunities you have is to hit the accelerator on digital initiatives. And so how can you take that online commerce store to the next level? How can you create new ways to interact digitally? And it's also an opportunity to take a fresh view on your business performance metrics. And so one of the things that we've seen is that there's been a rebalancing in terms of the risk performance cost ratios around managing things like facilities. And also from a financial standpoint, there are all sorts of considerations in relation to compliance. So if you're going to have a remote workforce, that's going to change some of the tax and compliance regimes that you have to deal with between presences in various states and various locations. as well as various forms of tax incentives, etc. So just moving on to those that are just surviving. I guess the good news is that there is light at the end of the tunnel, but there is a very simple mission that you're likely to have, and that is to survive the next 2 years. There will be hard choices that have to be taken, and there will be limited options. So one of the things that we're seeing a lot more of is that people are just having to roll their sleeves up and get on with it. That they're needing to learn how to do things that they haven't done previously, where they might have outsourced a particular function. They're having to figure out how to do it themselves. This is also because people are concerned or fearful for their jobs as well, because, when we talk about hard choices will have to be taken, that does mean some form of reorganization. It does mean some form of downsizing potentially. As those of us who have been through a sort of traumatic events have probably experienced, one of the keys here is focus, staging, and process. Focusing on the problem at hand and staging how you move through that process, and focusing on solving a particular problem at any given stage, and being aware that this is just a process that we're going through, is being key, at least in my experience of dealing with trauma and difficult business situations. So these become, if you like, another way of putting it from a warrior mindset is that they are the tools that you now become your friends, or the weapons that you have available to you. Focus, staging, and process. Reinvention is going to be important, but it will be considered. And the chances are that you will want to leverage your limited resources. So it's thinking about doing more with less. And another thing that I would be suggesting here is finding new digital revenue sources that previously you've probably dismissed as being a waste of time, like showing people how to do it themselves. Those historically have always been the difficult clients in a digital marketing agency, for instance. But we are being forced to pivot to help people learn how to do it themselves and help them upskill. Those that are thriving, I guess the way to characterize this is that it's a good problem to have. And so they're going to be adapting to a new mode of working, dealing with remote working expectations, space utilization. Stress test your assumptions and get prepared for the next waves. Don't be complacent. One of the key takeaways here is that empathy and tone and compassion will be your go-to from a leadership standpoint. That there's nothing worse than a tone-deaf leader talking about how fantastic things are for your business when all your peers are in the survival or steady state. There are a bunch of other recommendations here as well and thoughts. But the key thing is complacency is your enemy. And remember that your supply chains will continue to alter, especially for talent. So that the talent pool has in some ways expanded, and in other ways it's constricted, because you can't rely on talent coming from overseas. Visas have been stopped. So you've got a pool of talent that are kind of caught in between jobs that might be overseas, or you've got people that are being repatriated back. So your talent pool is just changed quite significantly, and the dynamics around supply of talent have changed when people can't travel. Just in terms of the drowning side of things, this is about choices in a storm, and some of the choices that you have are to wait it out, batten down the hatches, hibernate as best you can. For some, it will be about changing tack completely. I would suggest that there is the possibility that you could choose both, that you may be able to hibernate some part of your business and then look for other revenue sources or activities to help you be resilient through this. I guess the things that I would suggest here is to be aware that it will play out over a longer period of time. There will be different waves, but most especially that new opportunity exists. So it's about being willing and open to see what the possibilities are in relation to the new normal as it emerges. So in the last section, and I'm conscious that we've got a limited amount of time here, we've got a third poll that I'd just like Remy to put up. And I just want to talk briefly about some of the pathways that there are out of this. So, those of you who are familiar with Little Britain and those of you that are keen followers of British television would have seen that, with Comic Relief, they were raising funds for the NHS in the UK. There was an interesting metaphor here. When it comes to your existing business and surviving, one of your best pathways is to talk to the customers you already have. The relationships that you already have are your best opportunity for shoring up your short-term revenues. So in other words, leverage the people and the things that you're familiar with and the capability sets that you have that you're familiar with, but absolutely be willing to pivot to something different. So, it would be very easy for these, precious movie stars or TV stars to say, I'm not doing that because I just simply don't have the costumes to do it. This is an interesting example of how improvisation worked in this particular scenario. I want to also just touch on an example of this eerie new reality. Probably doesn't apply in Mark's case, but for some of us, that was just a test to see whether Mark was listening. That for some of us, we've actually had to contemplate cutting our own hair, and not so much from the point of view of having cut your own hair, which a lot of people around the world, this is still a problem for. So I was talking to somebody in Canada, they can't get their hair cut at the moment. That not so much from a personal services standpoint, but more from the point of view of the poor old hairdresser or barber. Their source of revenue has stopped. How do they reinvent themselves? How do they create a new paradigm in terms of their ability to earn an income going forward? So I want to share one insight when it comes to the digital world and a business like a hairdresser's. The thing is that at the same time, never have we been so far away in terms of social distance. But the fact that we're all in this together means that from a digital standpoint, our market is just radically expanded. There's no difference between getting lessons on how to cut your own hair from a barber in Geelong versus a barber in Toronto in Canada. So whilst you can't expect people to come into your store in a physical sense, your digital audience is a much bigger one, depending on how you view this. So it's an interesting way to kind of flip some of our assumptions on their head. Never before have we been so far away, but at the same time, so close. So our markets have expanded significantly. So yes, there is kind of a comedic new reality to how on earth do you train somebody to cut their own hair. And this is an example of a reporter from the Business Insider doing a story on, I need to cut my own hair, and actually engaging with a hairdresser around, or a barber around, how would I go about this? So one of the things about this is thinking about how you create value from an entirely different perspective. So one of the things that we've got with content makers is that they're in that category of steady or doing okay, shall we say, in terms of business. So the graphic that's up here, or the picture up here, is from a series on YouTube called Pasta Grannies. So one of the things that I did during lockdown was learn various different styles of cooking around the world. And so here we have 90-something grannies from Italy who are sharing recipes around pasta making and pasta dishes. So, fortunately for these content makers, the content was captured before the pandemic. But you're seeing these types of businesses being more resilient. The content makers are the ones that are surviving better. So Jamie Oliver, if you've seen his series on Keep Cooking and Carrying On, which is about focusing on making do with what you have and how you can create a tasty dish with limited supplies of things. He's one of the content creators or content makers that pivoted very rapidly to a modality where he was sharing knowledge in a way that empowered people. Then you had Russell Howard, who started his Home Time series. He had a world tour cancel. So, those people that are in the entertainment industry, they've had the rug pulled out from underneath them in terms of how do they generate revenue from gigs and travel. Another example is a chap called Pietro Baselli, who is a fitness model. There's no opportunity to go to a studio and have model shots taken in lockdown. He also happened to have a clothing line and is a fitness model. So he came up with content around how you could use a tractor tire and a sledgehammer to do workouts. I guess the key thing as a takeaway from all of this is what these people have managed to figure out is how they can disaggregate the value chain. They've looked at how value is created. Jamie Oliver is an obvious example. You're a restaurant owner, but you could only get so many people into your restaurant. And, if you're a restaurant owner now, you can't get very many people into your restaurant at all. So how could you create new forms of value and new revenue streams as a consequence of the knowledge that you have and the content that you can create? So I guess one of the takeaways is the potential to brainstorm the different ways that you could add value and disaggregate that value chain. And here's an example of, the hairdresser teaching the chap how to hold a pair of scissors. It's the first step in the process of cutting your own hair. Other businesses that I would point to that are showing us the way through are a company called Cushman and Wakefield. And they have an initiative called the 6-foot office, or the 6 feet office, which is about creating socially distanced workspaces and providing consulting services on how to adapt your workspaces to a socially distanced environment. They actually have a showroom in Sydney for this, well worth looking up. They've used the pandemic to create a whole set of principles and guidelines and consulting opportunities for social distancing in a services-based business. And in this picture, you can see the Perspex screen that's now been introduced into the workspace. Getting close to winding this up. So digital humans are another possibility here. So one of the things that you may or may not have come across are a variety of different types of digital humans out there. They can be used to undertake surveys, provide kiosk facilities. One of the things that you've seen is COVID-based apps with digital humans, educating people on pandemic and social distancing principles. And one of the projects that I've been lucky enough to get to work on is starting to look at the use of digital humans as a medical triage app for the NHS, where you're having to provide care, but socially distanced. So there are very interesting possibilities from a digital innovation standpoint using creatures that don't need to sleep and don't get sick. The third insight I'd like to share with you is this idea that data is your new friend. think of ways in which you can gather data to help educate yourself and your peers on what's going on. Another insight is that the new footfall, regardless of whether you're a services business or you're a retail business, is clicks. And it's not about how many likes or shares that you have. It is actually about engagement that you get. So you might have a big LinkedIn following. You need to think about how you can get engagement. And that is about forming relationship in a socially distanced way. We have to think about how we can form those relationships on an ongoing basis in a socially distanced world. Those of you that have got kids have probably come across Ryan's toys. Last year, he made $26 million US reviewing and unboxing toys. This is an 8-year-old. You know, if an 8-year-old can do it, some of us can potentially do it. And just one last note on this whole theme around cutting your own hair. There's an opportunity in all of this to learn from your millennial, hipster, Gen Y, COVID peers. And that is about content creation. And you might think there's no possible relevance to my business around this. Well, so the thing about showing people how to cut their own hair, it's not just the views that you get or the revenue that you make from YouTube. It's the products that you're actually able to sell as a result of people engaging with this content. So one of the opportunities may be to look at entirely different ways in which you can add value or sell products off the back of content that you're creating. Okay, so just to wind up, what are the 3 big, bold, brave questions to ask yourself? I would say that the first is, how will you sell and market in a socially distanced world, keeping in mind the fact that this could go on as long as 2 years? That if you're in survival mode, or you're in steady mode, or even in thriving mode, or actually in any of the modes for that matter, you need to consider how you're going to navigate your way from a sales and marketing standpoint in a socially distanced world. Second big, bold question to ask yourself is, how do you create more compelling, meaningful, commercial digital experiences for customers? So how do you make that online experience possible or better? And create digital experiences that engage and are compelling, but make money off the back of it. The third is, and it's kind of a question within a question, it's a suggestion. Question every assumption or risk that you have, or risk that there is in your resourcing or supply chain. There are a lot of assumptions that we've made in terms of how things will get back to normal, in terms of talent pools, talent acquisition, as an example, or other forms of resourcing, that while they might be okay today, they will be different going forward. Restrictions on travel are going to be a problem for quite some time to come. So you might have, some gig that relies on having a person come in. They're not going to be able to travel, even from a cross-border standpoint between Queensland and Victoria. So question every assumption, look at your risk register, and look at your resourcing supply chain, and make sure that you've got measures to mitigate risk. And so I guess with that, open it up for any questions and maybe any poll results.
Yes, so I'll just quickly read the poll results for you, Sam. So we've got those. So 36% are finding new ways to engage with clients at a distance. Similarly, 36% are figuring out how to do more with less. And similarly, 36% improving or automating existing processes. Then we fall down to taking business online or selling services online, 19%, exploring radically new ways at 8%, and doesn't apply to my situation, just at 16%. So it's really interesting. About a third are looking at doing things with less, automating processes, or finding new ways to engage clients at a distance. I'll just check to see if there's any questions as well.
So just while you're doing that, the last slide here, Remy, if you didn't connect before, and if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn. And if you've got any questions about how you could market and sell at a social distance, or create intelligent digital experiences, or transform how your business generates revenue, I'm more than happy to help. So please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn.
There is one question here, and then we'll make that the last with the time. We'll also put your contact details in the comments there as well, Sam. So Rani says, I would be quite interested to know your thoughts on New Zealand employers hiring citizens from remote locations due to the pandemic. Some of us are facing trouble returning back to New Zealand. I also have another question here. Are you suggesting that a business needs to go back and review their value proposition and then pull it apart and look at each part individually to identify new or adjustment value propositions?
So I'll answer the last question first. I think it's an opportunity to do that. I'm not saying that you should, but what we have, and I really find it horrible people using this term, an unprecedented situation here. But out of all adversity is an opportunity to look at how you can deliver value in radically different ways. So I would be suggesting that it is a smart thing to do, is pull apart your value chain and start thinking about how you can transfer elements of that value into a digital realm. And that's especially true for those of us that are in services businesses or in some form of online content production. And then with respect to the question about New Zealand employers hiring citizens from remote locations, look, I think there is a real challenge here in terms of you're going to see governments all over the world shut down visas. Like I was talking to a colleague in Canada, they've had their work visa withdrawn as a consequence of COVID-19. So they're in limbo in terms of they can't easily leave or return to New Zealand. And equally, one of them is a citizen of the UK, so couldn't move on there, but their partner isn't a citizen and the visa offices are shut. Like it's something as very simple as visa offices being closed or not processing applications that will be an impediment to getting people from one location to another. And I think that's going to be a global problem for some time to come.
Great, fantastic. All right, I'm conscious of time. So Sam, thank you very much for your presentation this afternoon. I certainly got some takeaways. Of particular interest for me is the digital human. I mean, that could really go. I can see that happening in the recruitment industry, absolutely, as well. So thanks again, everybody, for participating this afternoon. The next webinar that we have in the leadership series will be in a month's time. We haven't got the date and time exactly sorted, but watch out on your email for the date and time for that. We've got the contact details for Sam, so if you do have any additional questions, please reach out to Sam. But thank you again, Sam, for your contribution this afternoon. Thank you, everybody else, for contributing and being online, and we'll see you next time.
You're most welcome. Thanks very much.